All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started here. So my name is Tara Moore, and I'm the Director of Conservation Partnerships for the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. We're so excited to have you here for our talk tonight. This is the first in the Winter in the Refuges series. So we're going to be having 4 programs coming up. The first one starting tonight on the Pocosin Lakes Wildlife Refuge. The next one will be next Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. So if you guys are around every Wednesday, we will see you and every Wednesday this month. We have some great ones coming up. So we're excited to have you here tonight. Thank you for joining us. I know a bunch of you have been on some of the other talks that we've had. So I'm happy to see you guys in this setting, even though a lot of us can't see each other in person. So it's great to see you all here. Just to go over a few Microsoft Teams things before we get started. I think everyone is muted upon coming in, but if you're not, you can go ahead and mute your own line, and that is going to be located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. It looks like a microphone, and you can mute and unmute there. If you do have any questions that you want to put in the chat box, that is for Microsoft Teams members only who have the app, and that is, if you look at the top, there's a little blurb box and it says show conversation, and you can click there and you can write in a question or say what a great job someone's doing, anything that you'd like to add. And if you do have a question at any point, you can also put up the little hand symbol. So it says raise hand. It's in the top right-hand corner as well. We are going to leave the questions till the end just because there's a lot to cover. But once we get done with the presentation, you can put that hand up and we will get to all of your great questions. I know we do have some folks still kind of rolling in now, but we will just get started with the program. So I'm going to turn it over to Katerina Ramos, who is our speaker for tonight, my colleague also. She started working with us just this fall, and she has been an amazing asset to everything that we're doing here. And she is the Refuge Volunteer and Programs Coordinator, and I'm so excited to hear her share about all of the interesting species over there. I've been to the refuge just a handful of times, and I haven't gotten to see all the cool animals that she's going to talk about. So I'm looking forward to hearing from her, and I will turn it over to Katerina. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Tara. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get started with our program today. So thank you all so much for coming out today. So as Tara said, this is the first in the series of Winter in the Refuges. And today we're going to be talking about Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. As Tara said, my name is Katerina, and I really look forward to talking to y'all about this refuge today. So first thing that I want to mention and talk about is where the origin of National Wildlife Refuges came from. So it really came out of necessity of preserving waterfowl species. During the early 1900s, a lot of the fashion statements of that time period was to put waterfowl feathers in female hats, and it caused a lot of poaching and excessive take of waterfowl species. And Theodore Roosevelt actually recognized this and decided that there needed to be some sort of sanctuary or refuge system in place to preserve these species for years to come. So this is where the National Wildlife Refuge System was established. It was established in 1903 specifically for the waterfowl species. However, over time, it has evolved into different types of establishment for conservation value. So what makes this refuge system really unique is the fact that it's a very big wildlife focus. So if we think of national park services, we find that they're more geared towards human entertainment. There's a lot more trails and human-based activities that you can do on those lands. However, for wildlife refuges, that is not always the case. We tend to have more of the land preserved to keep our America's wild places conserved and be able to be there for years to come. So ordinarily, there is some sort of conservational value to each refuge, and that could be in anywhere in preserving specific hunting species, wildlife species, and adding to the general beauty and habitat of America, the United States of America. What's really even more unique about this refuge system is that it doesn't actually exist anywhere else in the world. United States is the only place that has a National Wildlife Refuge system in place to really create that connectivity between conservational locations and be able to keep that preservation of wild areas. So as we mentioned, within this refuge series, we're going to be talking about a couple of different locations. I'm just going to point out on this map here the other locations we'll talk about, and I'll point out where Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge is. So first, in my nice little blue box over there is Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. That'll be talked about. It's all coastal areas. There are several wildlife refuges that actually exist in North Carolina. Right down here is Mattamuskeet National Wildlife Refuge. And then right along our coast is Pea Island National Wildlife Refuge. It's a little hard to see. It's a little smaller, but it's really, really unique in size as well. And then, of course, we have Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. So one thing I want to point out is there's actually over 500,000 acres of wildlife refuge lands that is in North Carolina alone. And Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge takes up about 110,000 acres of that land. So it takes up a large portion of that National Wildlife Refuge land and is really important in the preservation of the ecosystem that it is established for. One thing I will note that there's about 12 National Wildlife Refuges that exist in North Carolina, most of them existing in eastern North Carolina. The other two that do exist is PD National Wildlife Refuge and Mountain Bogs National Wildlife Refuge, and those are more central North Carolina. So, but this specific seminar is about Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. So a little bit about the establishment of this National Wildlife Refuge is that it originally was just Pungo National Wildlife Refuge. And Pungo National Wildlife Refuge was around 12,000 acres of land and was established specifically for migratory waterfowl species. The Pungo unit of Pocosin Lakes is actually one of the largest areas of wintering waterfowl. And so that was established in the early 1960s for waterfowl. And it just so happened that in the 1990s, the Richard King Mellon Foundation donated around 98,000 acres of land to the National Wildlife Refuge system. And that created our Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge that we have today. So what ended up happening in the establishment of Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge was that Pungo National Wildlife Refuge was absorbed into that 98,000 acres of refuge land and created one large 110,000 acre refuge land. So Pungo unit still exists in its establishment currently for migratory waterfowl. However, Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge is the overarching wildlife refuge in the area. And really the establishment for Pocosin Lakes was specifically for the type of habitat that exists in the refuge. And that is called a Pocosin habitat. So basically what I want to show you here is this is the Pungo unit, which was also the Pungo National Wildlife Refuge back in the 60s. And so this was around 12,000 acres. And now we've expanded up to 110,000 acres. And that little red box right there is showing you Pungo unit compared to that 98,000 that was donated. So altogether, we have a really large amount of area that is being preserved for the habitat and for conservation species as a whole. So what is a Pocosin? A Pocosin is actually a really unique type of wetland habitat. It has a lot of organic matter built up. So basically what this organic matter is actually made of is dead leaves, animals, different types of soils and things like that. But what it's really, really known for is how wet it is and how that peat builds up. So another way to call Pocosin is also peat as well. It's also a very highly fire-dependent habitat despite being extremely wet. And why we need to conserve this habitat specifically is that it's actually not found anywhere else in the entire world. So Pocosin habitat makes up about 3% of the world's habitat and is only found between Virginia and Florida on the Atlantic coast. Sorry. So like I said, it is a fire-dependent habitat, so it does need fire in order to thrive and have a large amount of biodiversity. However, what ends up happening with this fire habitat and this type of habitat is that sometimes the fires can be caused to be more intense or more frequent due to some sort of disturbance. So the reason why we actually preserve the Pocosin habitat, not only because it is such a rare habitat to see, but also because a lot of disturbance to the soil has caused a frequency in fires in these areas. So because of these frequencies of fires, we have to mitigate them in ways that we can still allow the habitat to thrive, but also make sure there's not nearly as many intense or out of control fires. So the way that we try to mitigate this is through prescribed fires, which are basically controlled fires. So there's specific areas of land that we use to control the amount of fuel in the area when there's low risk to fire and low risk of it getting out of control. That way we can still have the environment stay healthy, but also mitigate the risk of large, intense fires. For example, when we do not have these kinds of prescribed fires, we can get fires such as the Evans Road fire that happened in 2008, where it burned over 25,000 acres of land and took around 6 months to actually get under control. So these controlled fires are really important in making sure we keep that habitat healthy and also making sure there's no danger to human health. In addition to prescribed fires, we actually have fire breaks all throughout the refuge to make sure that if we do have any kind of wildfire that does erupt, we can be able to mitigate it a lot more efficiently than we would without the fire breaks. So essentially, these fire breaks are portions of the refuge that are maintained to reduce the fuel to a wildfire. That way we can be able to go ahead and mitigate it better. Lastly, and it's going to seem very obvious, we also have hydrology restoration, and we consider this a passive water management technique to basically retain water into the soil. Because when this soil is disturbed, it loses the amount of moisture within it. So even though it's an extremely wet habitat, there is ways that it can lose that moisture within the soil. So within our hydrology restoration, we have a whole large amount of different areas that are mitigated differently. So we have areas that may have had high disturbance, meaning their soil was really disturbed or not nearly, the water table in that soil isn't nearly as high as it should be. And we try to raise that water table through these canals. So what I'm showing right here in this little corner is actually one of our water control structures. And we basically mitigate them through boards and risers. We have a set height that we'll have the water stay at in these canals to allow that water table to rise and really be able to soak in the water for the peat to stay healthy and to reduce that risk of fire. However, there are other areas within the refuge that don't need nearly as much water management or hydrology restoration, and we consider those low areas of disturbance. So really we don't mitigate the water, or we don't change the water tables there at all or try to raise the water tables because they are already at healthy levels. So we don't really have to worry about them nearly as much. So this is why we call it a passive water management technique, mostly because we don't really need to change much about the water besides allowing that water to stay at a certain height for the water table to be risen within the soil. So now that I talked to you all about the history of Pocosin lakes and the different ways that we manage it, I want to talk about what kind of outcomes come from all that management and the kind of wildlife and things that you can do on the refuge that really is preserved because of what we do. So the first thing I want to really point out is that you can actually hunt on Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. And the reason why this is because the establishment of Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge does not have to do with any specific species. It is specifically established for Pocosin habitat. Therefore, you can actually hunt deer, feral hog, some small game like cottontail, squirrels, raccoons, and some waterfowl. However, if you decide to go on the Pungo unit on Pocosin Lakes, you cannot hunt waterfowl there. And that is specifically because the Pungo unit was originally established for migratory waterfowl. So you can't hunt waterfowl on the Pungo unit, but you can hunt on other aspects of the refuge for waterfowl. In addition, in order to hunt on the refuge, you would need to go ahead and get a permit specifically for the refuge. And that permit is also going to give you a whole bunch of information about the regulations and the type of hunting you can do on the refuge. But regardless, you are still able to hunt on the refuge during regular hunting seasons, as long as you have your permit. In addition, we actually allow fishing in our canals as well. So of course, you're going to need some sort of state license that says you can do freshwater fishing, and you're going to need a refuge permit in order to fish on the refuge as well. So that's going to be with our hunting and fishing brochure that we'll have on our refuge and in our offices and on the website. And some of the species that you can actually catch in our canals are black crappie, various types of sunfish, and bullhead and channel catfish. So anywhere that you can reach a canal, you can hunt, you can fish in. However, there are restrictions during certain times of the year, specifically when the migratory waterfowl are around. And that will be in the canals near Pungo Unit and New Lake. And that's basically anywhere between September to February. Fishing is not allowed in those areas. But other times of the year, it is allowed. So just always make sure to reference that brochure if you decide to go fishing in Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. Make sure you're looking at the brochure and all of our rules and regulations for fishing on the refuge. So aside from fishing and hunting, you can also do wildlife viewing. So I mentioned earlier that it's not a human-based entertainment kind of refuge system. However, there is lots of potential for viewing really unique wildlife, getting some beautiful photography in, and doing some kayaking and canoeing to see a lot of the unique wildlife. You can kayak and canoe at any point on the refuge as long as it's open to the public, and at the same time you can't kayak on Pungo Lake specifically because of the migratory waterfowl. So anywhere that has public access for you to put in your kayak and canoe, you're able to go and kayak in the canals. Just make sure you're mindful of the signs there. So during the winter, we have a lot of different waterfowl that are seen on the refuge, and specifically Pungo Unit is our high interest area because of the wintering migratory waterfowl. And I'll let you know that we have 19 different species of migratory waterfowl that winter in the Pungo Unit during the winter. And then we have 6 resident species of waterfowl that actually are nesting on the Pungo Unit and are there year round. So a few that I want to highlight that are kind of interesting to see are the white-fronted goose, the lesser scaup, and the common goldeneye. Those are all have a lower or rare probability of sighting, but do actually nest on Pungo Unit. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you some of the cool waterfowl, some pictures of them, a little cute fact about them or so. So on this slide right here, we have the ringneck duck, which is really such a beautiful duck, and I really love that their characteristic that they show is that nice little white ring around their bill and those striking yellow eyes. And then of course I included some of the more common to see migratory waterfowl, green-winged teal, bufflehead, mallards, but ones that I really want to highlight are the tundra swan and the snow geese. And this is specifically because Pungo Unit as a whole can carry up to anywhere from 80,000 to 100,000 waterfowl in a single average season, but it has the highest density of tundra swan and snow geese in all of North Carolina. So tundra swan and snow geese end up wintering in Pungo Unit specifically in high numbers to the point where you'll just see fields of white, and it's absolutely spectacular. And one way that you can be able to differentiate tundra swan and snow geese from the rest of these flocks is that tundra swan tend to be a little bit smaller than their very similar looking sibling species, the trumpeter swan, by the fact that they're just a little bit smaller than those trumpeter swans. Snow geese specifically are currently in their white phase due to the winter, and they're really just characterized by that nice, beautiful white color with these really striking black tips to their wings. So if you look a little bit down here, you can see that really nice, striking black wingtip to those snow geese, and they're just absolutely phenomenal to see on the refuge at this time. In addition, I did mention earlier that it's a little rare to see the white-fronted goose on the refuge. However, they're really defined by that white band at the base of their bill, and it's really, really pretty. In addition, I just really enjoy the lesser scaup, so I'm just going to go ahead and show them. But they have this really pretty sky blue bill that just strikes so much in the differentiation from the rest of the waterfowl, as well as that really beautiful black head in the males. And lastly, when it comes to our migratory waterfowl or waterfowl in general, I want to point out the merganser because it's just so unique in the fact that its bill is not only really bright red, but it's serrated for catching fish. So if you ever see a common merganser, all you can think in your head is that it has a serrated bill just specifically for catching fish, which is very unique compared to other waterfowl species. So outside of the migratory waterfowl that you can see on Pungo Unit, we actually have a whole bunch of other species of songbirds and birds of prey and the likes on the refuge as well. And one that I would really love to highlight to y'all is the red-cockaded woodpecker. It is actually an endangered species of woodpecker and is very important ecologically. It is only found within the southeast region of the United States. In addition, it's also considered a keystone species. And the reason why it's considered a keystone species is that it actually makes this cavity within live pine trees. And within these pine trees, they make these cavities that they can live out of. But as they move on to new pine trees, the cavities that they leave behind are great for these secondary cavity dwellers that can't make their own cavities. So they actually provide habitat for other species that may need that habitat or that housing. So they're very unique in that way. And the reason why they've become so endangered is due to so much habitat fragmentation and human settlement within the pine forests. So they normally reside within pine forest and have a particular liking to longleaf pine. So once the populations of longleaf pine and pine forest started to decline due to human settlement, their habitat started disappearing. And through with a lot of conservation effort and trying to recreate their habitat and conserve their habitat, their population numbers have been going up. But they're absolutely gorgeous to see on the refuge. And really, if you're a birder, it's going to be a really fun sight for you. So in addition to the red-cockaded woodpecker, you're also going to find that we have a lot of the typical songbird species on our refuge as well. One that I would really love to highlight here on this slide, outside of your Carolina wren, your red-breasted nuthatch, and your pine warbler, is the red-winged blackbird. And the reason why I want to go ahead and point out that red-winged blackbird is that they actually have a very specific and unique type of behavior that they show on our refuge. And basically what they do is they flock in very large numbers, in like the thousands, which is very rare for this species, as they don't really like to flock in these types of numbers. But in Pocosin lakes, they tend to just flock all together, and you can sometimes just see seas of black with little red specks all throughout them. And it truly is just like a tornado of these guys going through the refuge. And it's really just such a phenomenal sight to see. It's just really awesome. So there's always a possibility of seeing that kind of crazy behavior. And then in addition, we have all of our other types. We have fishing types of birds, shorebirds, and of course, birds of prey here. And two that I really want to go ahead, or technically four that I would like to go ahead and point out. But the first one will be the kingfisher. And they're actually really cool to see on our refuge because they like to hang out in the canal system and fish. But what's really unique about them is that they don't actually nest in trees or cavities in the higher elements. They like to go ahead and burrow in the ground near these canals, which is really unique because whenever you think of any kind of bird in general, you like to think that they nest higher off the ground. But these guys like to go ahead and make burrows in soft soil like sands and sometimes peat. And they'll live along the canal. So they're going to be ones that you'll see frequently around our canals getting fish and things like that. In addition, I want to go ahead and point out to the bald eagle just to show a nice little success case of the Endangered Species Act and preserving wild species and things like that. And that's mostly because we saw a huge decline in bald eagle populations due to poaching and pesticides. And through a lot of conservation and preservation of the species, we now have the bald eagle no longer an endangered species, but one that's not even of any concern by the IUCN Red List. And lastly, in terms of our birds, I really want to go ahead and point out the willet and the killdeer, and that is specifically because these guys are both shorebirds. However, the willet is really coastal and likes to live along sandy beaches and things like that, and the killdeer is more particular to gravel and grasses. But what's really fun is that they actually show this similar behavior called the broken wing act, and you are sure to see it on our refuge, and they actually end up having a lot of people tricked in thinking that they're hurt, which is really great if they're with a predator, but I just want to make sure no one gets too worried about these guys. And I have a fun little video of this whole act showing them pretending that their wing is broken and kind of leading their cameraman away from their nest. So basically what they'll do is they'll go ahead and pretend that they're hurt, their wing is hurt, so they'll go ahead and drop a wing and make it look like they're all really pathetic and they can't go anywhere. And what they'll do is they'll actually lead predators away from their nest or their offspring. And once they are sure that they're far enough away from the nest, they'll go ahead and take up in flight and act like nothing ever happened. So it's a really unique behavior, and I thought it was really cool that the willet and the killdeer both show this really neat behavior. So there it goes, being all goofy, thinking it's all hurt. All right, it restarted. There we go. And lastly, I just want to talk about some of the mammals you'll be able to see on our refuge. And of course, the biggest one I want to mention, and probably a little too dear to my heart, is the American red wolf, which it truly is the American wolf, as it is not found in any other country in the world. It is only found within the United States historically and even to this date. So we currently have an experimental wild population that exists in eastern North Carolina. There's about 8 individuals that we know exist in the wild, and then about an estimated 14 to 20 that we think are also in the wild that we are not sure of. So we have 8 collared individuals that we can track, and then we're estimating there's at least another 14 to 20 that we don't know of. So this species originally came onto the Endangered Species Act in 1960s. And eventually, by the 1970s, they were noticing that their population numbers were decreasing so much that in order to preserve the species, they caught as many of them as possible to bring into a captive breeding program. Out of all the individuals that they caught, they only found that 14 individuals have genetically distinct information in them, and they actually used those 14 individuals to bring the red wolf population to where it is today. So every red wolf that is in captivity or in the wild is some sort of descendant of the original 14 from the 70s. Currently, Pocosin Lakes actually has a center specifically for the red wolf. And we do plan on having programs there. However, due to COVID-19, we are currently closed with that visitor center. But eventually, we would love to go ahead and show y'all the exhibit wolves that we have there and spread information about the American red wolf. And then I want to go ahead and just point out some of the really fun species that people have seen on the refuge. We do have beaver on the refuge, which tends to cause a little bit of a problem with our hydrology restoration. They like to make a lot of dams, and unfortunately, our hydrology restoration requires us to have a lot of water moving throughout the refuge or being able to be sustained within the refuge. So beavers like to mess up our hydrology plans a little bit. In addition, we do have bobcat. Bobcats are actually seen taking the main roads on the refuge, so they're actually a really nice sight to see. Many people have noticed them earlier in the mornings and a little bit later in the evenings, just walking the main roads and taking advantage of that open road. Really fun to see them. They're really unique, and they don't really seem to run away too fast. They kind of just stroll along. In addition, we do have families of river otter on the refuge, which is just really fun. People have seen a family of 4 just hanging out in the canals off of the Pungo unit, so always keep your eyes on the canals for those guys. They're just absolutely adorable and very charismatic. And lastly, I want to go ahead and talk about black bear. So black bear is actually really unique in this part of in North Carolina because we seem to have black bear that don't hibernate. So at any time of the year, you should be able to see black bear. In addition, we actually have the highest number of black bear populations per capita in the state. So it's really rare to leave Pocosin Lakes without seeing a black bear. And there's a lot of different areas that you can find them in, mostly within the co-op farming areas that have had some sort of crop like corn or soy throughout the year. And there's a couple of roads that are more particular for that species too. And lastly, I just want to go ahead and point out a couple of the different other more common types of wildlife you'll see. People can see red fox on the refuge as well, that nice little red fiery coat that they have. I, of course, mentioned that you can hunt white-tailed deer on the refuge as well. You'll see some raccoons in that kind of weird way that they do in the little canals playing with some fish or trying to mess with their next meal. Mink do exist on our refuge. They're also within the canals. They're closely related to otters, and they do kind of the same behavior. And lastly, I want to mention the coyote. It's a non-native species to North Carolina. However, they do exist on the refuge, so many people do get them confused with the red wolf. However, they have a smaller stature than the red wolf and have shorter legs, so they look a little stumpy next to the red wolf. But you know, those are just also other species that you may be able to see. And lastly, I just want to point out that Pocosin Lakes does have a wildlife drive. So this is actually located on the Pungo unit specifically, mostly because the Pungo unit has a lot to offer in terms of the migratory waterfowl and a lot of the different species that you can see there. So typically, we like to ask that everyone always goes to our kiosk to make sure they have a map. Whenever you go on this refuge, you should always have some sort of map because our cell service is very spotty. In addition, on this wildlife drive, if you look, we have little stars here to show that there's different observational viewing points on the refuge that you can go to in order to just appreciate the scene or appreciate the wildlife that is there. However, we do plan on trying to get some programs on the wildlife drive, and if you do have any questions about maybe programs coming up, I do have my contact information on this slide just for kicks and gigs. But at the same time, I'll also have it towards the end as well. But I do want y'all to know that if you do have questions about coming down to Pocosin Lakes or anything like that, I am always open to answer any questions or any concerns, especially with our roads and the variability of weather, especially during the winter. If you would like to get more information on Pocosin Lakes, however, there's several different ways you can go about it. If you'd like to get maps or hunting brochures or anything like that, you can go to the kiosk on the Pungo unit, which is what I just circled earlier. You can come to our headquarters in Columbia, or you can go on the Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge website. So that's an FWS.gov website, but it has all the maps that we offer and all of the hunting brochures and a whole bunch of information. In addition, if you need updates on the road conditions or things that may be closed for the season and things like that, you should always check our social media pages on Facebook at NC Refuges or Friends of NC Refuges, or you can call our office at 252-796-3004. And with all of that information I have thrown at you, I will gladly take questions, and there is my contact information for you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. This was an amazing wealth of info on such a fascinating part of the state. I want to take a trip over there, I know, right now. So thank you. If anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and click the little hand symbol and you can raise your hand. It's located at the top right-hand corner. I do see we have a question. Does the Wildlife Refuge have an annual pass, Katerina?
As in, like, kind of like how the national park system has like those annual passes that you pay like a one-time fee and you have access to the park at any time?
I believe that's probably, yes.
Okay, so actually you don't have to pay to go onto the refuge. So it's actually open access to the public. You can get onto the refuge at any point in time. You always just need to be mindful of the signs that say whether or not a vehicle is allowed in a certain area or if the public is allowed in certain areas. But in terms of paying any type of fee to get onto the refuge, it is open access to the public between daylight hours. You don't want to go there at night. No one's allowed on the refuge at night. Sorry, needed to make sure.
No, I think that's great. And everyone else, if you have questions, you can also put them in the chat as the previous person did. So thank you. I have a quick question that I can throw in there from my point of view as well. If there are some folks across the state that would like to visit the refuge and they don't exactly know how to go about that and they would like some type of guided tour, is that available? Is that something that they could set up with you?
At the moment, we are working with COVID-19 restrictions in order to give tours. I would love to be giving tours right now. Gosh. But at the current moment, there's no guided tours that I personally can actually give with the COVID-19 restrictions, but they are something that we will be giving in the future when COVID-19 isn't as rampant as it is, and there's less risk to the public.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. Where is a good place to stay near the refuge is a question someone had asked.
You know, I'm really not sure. There's several towns that are near it. A lot of people stay in the Outer Banks and sometimes come over. But as far as actual hotels and places to stay, I'm really not sure on that one.
Yeah, we'll get back to you on that question.
Yeah.
That's a good question, Robin.
Please send it to my
I would
email.
like to know as well. Yes.
Yeah, please. Yeah, ask it to my email as well. If I can't answer your question, please send it to my email, and I will make sure to follow it up with you.
Thank you, Katerina. We have another question. Are there any plans to open the roads closer to Pungo this season? Are the roads closed to foot traffic as well, or simply auto traffic?
So the roads currently on the internal roads of Pungo unit are closed, and that's due to the hazardous conditions of those roads. In terms of foot traffic, I do know that you can still walk North Lake Road, but always be mindful of the signs that we have up on the refuge. A lot of them will tell you whether or not you can put your vehicle on that road or if you can walk that road. And sometimes they say that neither a human or a vehicle are allowed on the roads. But as it currently stands, we are still having some hazardous road conditions on the internal roads of Pungo Unit.
Great, thank you. And I know we have a few questions in the chat and a few with raised hands. So I'm going to turn over to a raised hand now. And we'll go to Rob Powell. If you would like to unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Yeah, what size of boat can you put in down there, or is it strictly canoe and kayak?
We don't have any boat ramps that I know of on Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. So I do know you can just put in your canoe or kayak, but I do not believe we have any boat ramps.
Thank you, Katerina. We have another question. What is the best time or month to see the tundra swans? Where do the birds migrate from and to?
So in terms of the best months to see them on the Pungo unit, that would be December, January, February time. That's where they're really wintering on Pungo unit. And if you'd like to know more on their migratory patterns, I do know that I believe next week is going to be a tundra swan specific seminar. So I'm going to leave it up to Stephen Warner to give you more information on their migration patterns.
Great.
I know that was a little like eluded.
No, that sounds great. We'll make sure to get you that information, Clark.
Yeah, absolutely.
And why do the black bears not go into the hibernation in this part of the state?
That's a great question. So there's some speculation. I don't have a solid answer for you, but if we were to speculate, it could be because of the type of temperatures that we experience here. A lot of the times they can still find food during the winter months because of our temperature differences. But I can really only speculate. I don't have a solid answer on that one per se.
Great, thank you. And we have a question from Vicki Matlock. If you would like to unmute yourself.
Tara, I will send you information on a really nice cabin. There's like probably 4 to 6 cabins that are near all this area. That's where we stayed last year when we went to see the Tundra Swan the first week in February, and it was magical. So I will send that information, and maybe you can get that out to whoever needed to know about location. So I'll get
Vicki.
that to you.
Perfect. I'm sure Pat will appreciate that, and I think everyone else will on here as well. Anyone else who wants to go
very clean and nice. So
thank you.
That's awesome.
Thanks, Vicki. I appreciate that. We have a question from Patty. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi. Yes, I'm trying to figure out exactly where the site is and what part of the state. I know it's kind of coastal, and you mentioned the Outer Banks.
Mm-hmm. So we are located closer to, I'm trying to think exactly where I could really tell you. Pocosin Lakes actually expands 3 counties. So it's located within Terrell, Washington, and Hyde, if I believe correctly. So our main office is located out of Columbia. A lot of the times you could stop by our headquarters office in Columbia, and then we can give you directions down off of 94 or another way around Lake Phelps.
Columbia, North Carolina?
Yes.
Okay. See, I don't even know where that is. Wow.
It's about 40 minutes, I think, away from the Outer Banks.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, no, that's okay. I'm in Charlotte, so I'm kind of lost when it comes to that end of the state, I guess. But thank you.
It's about a 5-hour drive from Charlotte.
I was going to say, if it's Outer Banks, it's a long way away.
Yeah,
but
it looks fabulous. It's definitely worth it. It's a worthwhile trip out there.
Oh yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it's something I definitely would like to do. Thank you. This has been quite enjoyable.
Of course. Thanks, Patty. Did John Crystal have his hand up, or are you all set, John? And you are just muted right now, John.
I am all set. I was just going to give information about approximately where it is for somebody that's that far away. But, you know, all they'd have to do is do, you know, 64 to Columbia from Charlotte.
Thanks, John. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Did anyone have any more questions with their hands raised as well? I do have one more question. We saw a lot of images of different animals, and if folks had to leave this webinar and kind of think, what are those signature animals of the like refuge over there? What would you say maybe those signature 4 or 5 species would be, Katerina?
Absolutely, tundra swan, snow geese, the red-cockaded woodpecker for sure, and probably black bear. Those seem to be like the big ticket items of Pocosin Lake specifically.
Great, thank you. I think that inspires all of us to make a journey over there. So I don't think we have any more questions. I'll give everyone just another few seconds. But if we are all set, it looks like no more questions have come in. We will hopefully see you next Wednesday at 6 p.m. where we'll be talking about Lake Mattamuskeet, and that will be a wonderful webinar as well. So we hope to see you there. Thank you all so much for being part of the talk tonight and for taking out your time. And thank you for our wonderful speaker for sharing all this great information. We really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all across the state.
Thank you, Katerina, great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope to see y'all soon.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Tara.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much.